to start the ceremonies this evening. I just want to say a couple of things because if I don't say them now, I may forget them later. They relate to the new fellows and the Laha Award winners. We'd like to take a group photograph of you after everything is done. So the main part of the audience will go off to a reception at the end of the ceremonies about 9:30, but we'd like the new fellows and the Laha Award winners to stay behind so we can take your group pictures. And I may forget to say that at the place where I introduce you. Okay, I'd like to welcome you to the ceremonies where we honor our members in a variety of ways, and I'd like to begin by introducing the members of the executive, and this includes an incoming member or two, and also the chair of a committee or two. First of all, I'd like to introduce Mike Steele, who's our outgoing past president. Mike. Ruth Williams, who's our president-elect. Ruth. Gunther Walter, who's our program secretary. Thanks, Gunther. Hans Kunsch, who's our incoming president-elect. Aroda Legl, who's our incoming executive secretary. Ian Johnston, who's chair of the Committee on the Carver Medal, and Shiman Shao, who's standing in for the chair of the Committee on Fellows. Thanks, Shiman. And as I indicated, quite a few of those are leaving the executive. They are, by this stage, all worn out, and we're sending them out to rejuvenate. And I'd like to offer them and some other officers and editors who I haven't mentioned to you, and some of them are not here tonight, our special thanks for all the work that you've done. Oh, yes, I do seem to have left out Jean Opsimer, the treasurer. Please stand up. Yeah. I have a bad habit of ignoring Belgians, I'm afraid. It's please forgive me. Okay, so I'd like to thank, in particular, Mike Steele, the IMS past president, and I'd like to present you with a plaque in recognition of your services to the Society. Thanks, Mike. Martin Wegkamp, the Executive Secretary, who can't be here this evening. Ofer Zatuni, I don't think Ofer is here either. Jeffrey Grimmett, I should say that Ofer Zatuni was the editor, or is the outgoing editor of the Annals of Probability. Jeffrey Grimmett, who's the outgoing editor of Probability Surveys. The Balan Toth, the outgoing editor of the Electronic Journal of Probability, and Timo Sapalian, who's the outgoing editor of the Electronic Communications in Probability. I'd also like to thank the IMS chairs for this JSM. They're Jun Liu and Rong Chen, the IMS program chairs, and Asurav Chatterjee, who was the IMS Contributed Papers Chair. I'd also like to offer our special thanks to IMS contractors. We have a unique relationship with those who provide vital services to our society, and in honor of those long-term relationships with them, we'd like to take this opportunity to honor 3 of them for their services. First of all, Tati Howell, I'm not sure how we're going to manage. Oh, Elise is going to take the photograph here. She has a telephoto. Just be careful you don't fall off there. Thank you. Secondly, Matson Publishing, and in particular Jerry Matson, who's been working with us and for us for 10 years, providing us with invaluable production management services. So Jerry, I think is Jerry not here? Okay, we'll do this at some later stage. And I'd also like to invite you all here this evening to stay behind when I've finished what I'm going to say at the very end for a reception that follows these proceedings here. Yes, thanks. I scribbled over that. Patrick Kelly, who we'd like to honour for 20 years service as production editor for the IMS journals. Patrick. My apologies, Pat. The next on the agenda is the presentation of the Harry C. the Carver Award. And I'd like to introduce Ian Johnston, the chair of the Carver Award Committee, to make the presentation. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you, Peter. Actually, Joe Eaton is the chair of the committee, but alas, he couldn't be here, so I'm standing in. The Carver Medal was created by the IMS in honour of Harry C. Carver, the founding editor of the Annals of Mathematical Statistics and one of the founders of IMS. The medal is for exceptional service, specifically to the IMS, and is open to any member of IMS who has not previously been elected president. The recipient of the 2011 Carver Medal is Ross Ledbetter, and the citation reads, for his contributions to the success of the 1994 World Congress, Third World Congress at North Carolina, for his service on the IMS Council, and for his editorial work. And if I may add, a little on behalf of our committee, the North Carolina Congress was only the second Congress in which IMS and the Bernoulli Society had collaborated, and it was the first in the IMS heartland of North America. Ross almost single-handedly oversaw much of the local arrangements and the coordination of the scientific program. And if I can quote Willem van Swet, who was on our committee as well, apart from the rattlesnake that provided some local colour by showing up in the conference building, no further incidents were recorded. Congratulations, Ross. Okay.
Now we come to what for many of our members is something of a highlight of every JSM. It's the occasion of the presentation of the new fellows determined by the Committee on Fellows, and Shiman Shao is going to read the citations and present call the new fellows forward, and I'm going to present the plaques. Thanks, Shiman.
Thank you, Peter. The chair of IMS Fellow Committee was not able to attend this conference, so he asked me to give this presentation. Those who are named IMS Fellows have demonstrated distinction in research in statistics or probability by publications of independent work of merit. Fellows may also be well-established leaders whose contributions to the field of statistics or probability, other than original research, are of equal or greater value of their work, or their work has contributed greatly to the utility and appreciation of these areas. When your name is called, please approach the podium to receive your award. I will read a citation for each fellow present this evening. For those not present this evening, I will read only their name. Citations for each new fellows can be found in the awards booklet in the bulletin or on our website. Pete Barrett, University of California, Berkeley. For the leading contributions to research at the interface between statistics and machine learning, including the development of a variety of measures of complexity and for editorial surveys. Grand Ben Arose, Coulomb Institute of Mathematical Sciences. Freddy Delbeni, ETH Zurich. Paul Dubles, Brown University. Jia Songjing, Carnegie Mellon University. For outstanding contribution to sparsity signal recovery, the analysis of high-dimensional data more generally, and the optimality of statistical methods, exhibiting deep technical expertise and the ability of creating path-breaking new research strategies. Wilson Johnson, University of California at Irvine. For world-class contributions in various areas of statistical methodology and applications, including the topics of inflation observations, diagnostic screen tests, asymptotics and Bayesian non-parametric survival analysis, and for editorial surveys. Estate Kamalaz, Victoria University of Wellington. Wolfgang Polnick, University of California at Davis. For many important and mathematically challenging results in non-parametric regression and time theories, often involving the rigorous application of non-trivial techniques for handling empirical process and for editorial surveys. William Rosenberg, George Mason University. For major contributions in sequential analysis and clinical trials involving rigorous treatment of adaptive randomization and response adaptive design, and including development of a framework for optimal allocations. Lorong Self-Coast, Cornell University. Marta Sanzin-Su, University of Barcelona. Gordon Slade, University of British Columbia. Houston, University of California at Irvine. For world-class Bayesian methodological research, especially in the context of hierarchical models, for influential interdisciplinary work in disease mapping and health statistics, medical imaging, biology, and for extensive professional surveys. Maria Elonia Barrios, CBPF, Brazil. For important contributions to interacting particle systems, matter stability, large deviations, and hydrodynamics of these systems, especially to stochastic systems motivated by statistical physics problems, and also for editorial surveys and for scientific leadership in South America. VK1, University of California at Los Angeles. For prolific and path-breaking work on optimum design, including continuous optimum designs, minimax, and multi-objective optimum designs, and also for editorial surveys. Yiming Xiao, Michigan State University. Chongming Zhang, University of Wisconsin Medicine.
Chunming's not here. Okay.
Hongtu Zhu, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. For outstanding and prolific work in handling missing data problems and latent variables models, in developing neuroimaging ideas, including diffusion tensor imaging methodology, and in creating a general approach to diagnostics. Congratulations, all the new fellows.
Okay, thank you very much, Shiman. Now let me go to the next part of the ceremonies. I'd like to introduce once again Gunther Walter, our program secretary, who is going to announce the 2012 special lecturers. Gunther, thank you.
It's a pleasure to announce the 2012 special lecturers. First, there's the Wald Lecture. The Wald Memorial Lecture honors Professor Abraham Wald. The Wald Lecture gives 2, 3, or 4 one-hour talks on one subject. This gives sufficient time to develop material in some detail and to make accessible to non-specialists. Presenting the 2012 Wald Lecture is Stephen Lawrence, University of Oxford. Next we have the Lecam Lecture. The Lecam Lecture is to be given every third year. The lecturer should be an individual whose contributions have been or promise to be fundamental to the development of mathematical statistics or probability. An endowment was set up in memory of Lucien Lecam by his friends to create this special lecture. And presenting the 2012 Lecam Lecture will be Pascal Massard, Université de Paris Sud. And finally, we have the medallion lecturers. The Committee on Special Lectures invites individuals to deliver medallion lectures in the following 4 areas: probability, theoretical statistics, applied statistics, and interdisciplinary. Medallion lectures are distinct from invited papers, which are chosen by the various program committees for specific meetings. The 2012 medallion lecturers are Yoav Benjamini, Tel Aviv University; Emmanuel Candes, Stanford University; Shurav Chatterjee, University of California, that should be Courant Institute now; Nicole El-Karoui, École Polytechnique; Franco Flandoli, University of Pisa; Donald Gieman, Johns Hopkins University; Alexandre Supakov, University of Paris 6, and Van Vu, Yale University. So this concludes the announcement of the special lectures, and my congratulations to all lecturers.
Thank you very much, Gunther. I'd next like to announce the recipient of the Tweedy Award, Richard Tweedy, who happens to have been a good personal friend of mine. played a significant role throughout his professional career in mentoring young colleagues at work and through the various activities of several professional societies. With funds that were donated by his friends and family, the IMS created the Tweedy New Researcher Award. The award provides funds for travel to present the Tweedy New Researcher invited lecture at the IMS New Researchers Conference. And before I announce the winner, I'd perhaps like to mention that if I cast my mind back some 37 years, I was actually one of the young people whom Richard mentored at the time that I was doing my master's degree. So I know that he did this throughout his career. The 2011 award will be presented to Hui Zhao at the University of Minnesota during the ENAR conference in February 2012. I pass on next to the recipients of the Lahar Award. With funds from a generous bequest by the late Professor Radha Govind Lahar, the IMS has established the Lahar Awards to provide funds for travel to present a paper at the IMS annual meeting. And I remind you again that I'd like the Lahar awardees to stay behind so we can take a photograph of you after the close of these ceremonies. And I'd also ask you if you would stand as I call your name. Thank you very much. Gunkan Kao at Michigan State University, Xiang Liu at the University of Rochester Medical Center, Xin Liu at the University of North Carolina, Yui Ni at the University of Pennsylvania, Alexei Apolyuchenko at the University of Southern California, and I know that he is not able to be with us this evening. Gavish Raskuti at the University of California, Berkeley. Dan Shen at the University of North Carolina. Minjing Tao at the University of Wisconsin. Xin Tong at Princeton University. Yuqing Wang at the University of California, Berkeley. Peng Wang at the University of Illinois. Gongjun Xu at Columbia University. Yanwen Yang at the University of Illinois. And finally, but by no means least, Kai Zhang at the University of Pennsylvania. And we seem to be rushing through the ceremony, so you should be able to get to bed early tonight. I think at this point I pass over to young Mike Steele.
Thanks, Peter. It certainly is my honor and privilege to provide a brief introduction to Peter Hall, who actually is one of those few for whom it's genuinely possible to say he needs no introduction. All of you know a great deal of his scientific work, which ranges from pure probability to the grittiest and slimiest of applied statistics. He also has a number of special skills which you might not know about. He's a world-class photographer, and he also has a true sense of direction. If you want to know which way is north, Peter can tell you, and this is a valuable skill to have in life. One of his natural accomplishments, given his location in one of the most awkward parts of our planet, is he has a most enviable collection of frequent flyer miles. Now, I should also say a few things about what I learned from Peter from working with him during our period of service as president and past president and president-elect of the IMS. And it's my view that he is the man of most balanced judgment with whom I've ever had the privilege to interact. He can listen to and absorb the concerns of a diverse constituency of people, truly understand their points of view, look for reconciliations or optimal solutions, and then provide effectively toward the solution and resolution of those issues that are before him. This is an extraordinary executive skill, and we are amazed. I'm amazed at how effective he's been and how smooth and apparently effortlessly he's been able to achieve all of these things. So that's the fundamental sense of the man to me, and it certainly has been a privilege to have worked with him and to have learned from his coaching. And now I'd like to have him come forward and give us his presidential address. Thanks very much, Mark. It's very valuable.
Okay. Thanks very much, Mike, for those very generous as well as warm remarks. North, I can find north in the southern hemisphere because I know the sun goes there in the middle of the day. But up here, it's a bit more challenging. I'm only going to put the first page of what I'm going to say on the screen, and only that because it contains the title. I want to talk about something that has been something of a campaign for me at home and more recently internationally for a couple of decades. Ever since the time my own research performance was assessed in terms of how many dollars I brought in, and I upset the chairman of the board of the faculties at my university by saying I thought that was not the right way to do things. But nevertheless, along with almost everything else in our society, we believe that we can quantify research performance, and we generate large quantities of data which relate to us. I want to talk tonight about how those data are currently analyzed and perhaps say a little about how we might deal with these issues in the future. And I'm going to start by talking about rankings, for example, of the institutions or departments where we work. And these rankings are among the most common of the techniques that are used to analyze us, not just us, but rankings are used to analyze all sorts of institutions in the society where we live and work, that used to rank hospitals and schools and just about everything else. They're not used to rank politicians. I think they should be. Goldstein and Spiegelhalter, in a really outstanding paper in the Journal of the Royal Statistical Society, Series A, in 1996, argued that no ranking should be unaccompanied by a measure of its authority, a little bit like a confidence interval in a much simpler statistical problem. And we have seen, and I'm sure you will agree with that from what you have seen of rankings, very few cases where this has actually been done. Another property that rankings should have is that they should be reasonably transparent, so that the implicit statements that they make about us are clear to non-experts. And those non-experts often include us as well. And perhaps the most familiar of rankings to many of us are the international rankings of universities. The data on which they rely are seldom accessible, often because revealing those data would give some indication of the methodology used for the ranking, or would potentially reveal that methodology. And in fact, this methodology currently can usually only be accessed in an approximate way, for example, via a process of reverse engineering the rankings noting the changes in the rankings which occur after Nobel Prizes are awarded. And I know that the senior managers at my university are actively engaged in that reverse engineering. For example, a couple of years ago, one of our undergraduates in the very distant past won a Nobel Prize, or shared a Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine at the University of California, or I think at San Francisco. And she had received her undergraduate education, I would guess, in the late 60s, early 70s. The people who taught her have long since left the university, and yet the ranking of the university shot up several steps. Yet despite these issues, these rankings have a significant influence on the comments and subsequently the actions of university managers, and sometimes also on the decisions of governments. An example of rankings which are a little different from those that I've described are the US National Research Council rankings of university statistics departments, which were compiled on the basis of data on graduate programs and were released almost a year ago. These rankings are to be applauded for incorporating statistical measures of authority that are based on resampling ideas into their analysis. Although I have to say that having investigated these issues myself with a PhD student, I find that actually the determining of the authority of the ranking based on the ordinary bootstrap, the so-called synchronous bootstrap, is actually a very difficult process, and there's a lot needs to be done on that topic. These rankings, as I said, were released almost a year ago, and accompanying them there was an extensive manual that describes their methodology and metrics. And admirably, last October, the ASA organized a NIS workshop on assessing the quality of graduate programs. And if I understand things correctly, a major motivator of that workshop was Nick Fisher, who I think is in the audience here this evening. However, something that those of us who work in US universities have noticed with some concern is that the ranking doesn't meet the criterion of transparency. And as a result, the ranking not infrequently has been misinterpreted by university managers. More generally, statistical issues relating to the modeling of rankings, to describing their authority, and simplifying their interpretation deserve greater attention from us as statisticians than we have given them. I'd now, if I might, get onto the topic of citation statistics, citation analysis, which in one way or another is going to make up much of what I'm going to say for the rest of my short time here. Rankings, like graphs and pie charts, are only a way of presenting data. The data themselves should be a focus of our attention. The IMS, as a society, and also through its individual members, has played an important role in the study of performance-related data. And in particular, the IMS was one of three professional bodies. The others were the International Mathematical Union, or the IMU. This is the body that awards the Fields Medals at an international mathematical congresses every 4 years, and the International Council of Industrial and Applied Mathematics, or ICIAM. The IMS was one of these three professional bodies which produced the report Citation Statistics, addressing what is perhaps the most pernicious of academic topics, the use of bibliometric data. The report's authors, Robert Adler, who's a member and in fact a fellow of the IMS, John Ewing and Peter Taylor, who is also a member of the IMS, expressed their concern about the use of citation data for assessing research performance. Their report is publicly available on the web, and it was also published in our journal Statistical Science in 2009. And it noted that there is a belief, and here I'm quoting from the report, there is a belief that citation statistics are inherently more accurate because they substitute simple numbers for complex judgment and hence overcome the possible subjectivity of peer review. The authors of the report pointed to the fallacy of these beliefs and drew conclusions that, although of some concern to other scientists, and I know from my own experience to university and other institutional managers, resonate with many of us. And let me briefly read to you some of their conclusions which are pertinent to the things that I want to say in a few moments. First of all, and I quote again, the accuracy of citation metrics, e.g. raw citation counts, impact factors, H factors, and so forth, is illusory. Moreover, the misuse of citation statistics is widespread and egregious. In spite of repeated attempts to warn against such misuse, e.g. the misuse of the impact factor, governments, institutions, and even scientists themselves continue to draw unwarranted and even false conclusions from the misapplication of citation statistics. Secondly, and I'm still reading from their conclusions, the sole reliance on citation-based metrics replaces one kind of judgment with another. Instead of subjective peer review, one has the subjective interpretation of a citation's meaning. And the third point, and last that I'll quote from their report, while statistics are valuable for understanding the world in which we live, they provide only a partial understanding. Those who promote the use of citation statistics as a replacement for a fuller understanding of research implicitly hold such a belief. We not only need to use statistics correctly, we need to use them wisely as well. Bibliometric analyses and other statistical measures are sometimes used in connection with the appointment and promotion cases within our institutions, occasionally with dramatic consequences. And I'll say a little more about that shortly. Indeed, the potential applications of citation analysis to appointment and promotion decisions are major reasons for the heightened interest in the interpretation and application of bibliometric analyses. However, as you'll be aware, there are many other empirical approaches to analyzing our performance which are sometimes employed when we are assessed for appointment or promotion, or as happens in some cases where the strand of the regime of tenure, which is so common in the US, doesn't always apply. And not all of these alternative measures are any better than citation analysis by any means. For example, they range from the Texas A&M University Systems development of methodology, which evaluates how much money a professor is worth based on his or her salary, how much research money they bring in, how much money they generate from teaching, and so forth. And of course, there's the much more widespread use of student evaluations of classroom teaching. I want to now look at some specific examples of attempts that nations outside the US, and I'll come to the US again when I draw conclusions, some examples of the attempts that nations have made to, first of all, to see how effective citation analysis and its progeny are in the ranking of particularly science, how it compares with peer review, and I want to try and see what we can learn from this. And I'm going to mention only three. The first will be the experience of Italy, and I choose these three because I know a little about them. I know that these issues arise also in Belgium, for example, where some years ago I was astonished to receive a Belgian grant proposal where every cited paper of the author had to be accompanied by the impact factor of the journal where it was published. Fortunately, my Belgian colleagues told me that I could ignore this since nobody paid any attention to it. It's a bit like putting a full stop at the end of the line, apparently. And I know that in the Netherlands, too, there's been a particular emphasis, perhaps not so much today, but in the past, on the assessment of performance using bibliometric data. But anyway, I'm going to talk about three other countries, Italy, Australia, and the United Kingdom, and then draw conclusions at the end. Let's look first to Italy, which in its national research evaluation, which commenced in 2003, sought to answer the following questions, among others. The first was, are peer-reviewed judgments and bibliometric indicators independent variables? And if they're not, what is the strength of the association between them? And the second question was, is the association between peer judgment and article citation rating significantly stronger than the association between peer judgment and journal citation rating? And there's a fair bit of literature on the web, including at least two very interesting papers on the analysis of data to support the following conclusions, among others. It was concluded in this study, first of all, the bibliometrics are not independent of peer review assessment, as you might expect. There has to be an association. But while the correlation between peer assessment and bibliometric indicators is statistically significant, it is far from perfect. And the second conclusion, and here I quote from their report, was that bibliometric indicators may be considered as approximation measures of the inherent quality of papers, which, however, remains fully accessible only with the aid of human unbiased judgment, meditation, that's a poor use of words there, and elaboration. I can't actually imagine my managers meditating on the results of bibliometric indicators. To continue my quotation, we advocate the integration of peer review with bibliometric indicators, in particular those directly related to the impact of individual articles during the next Italian national assessment exercise. I'm now going to turn to Australia, which is somewhat newer to this game than certain other countries, certainly newer than the United Kingdom, which began assessing the research of academics in virtually every field back in the mid to late 1980s. But nevertheless, we are fairly serious about it, or at least we think we are, and let's see how serious we really are. Australian authorities have been endeavouring to turn bibliometric data to good use so as to distribute block grant funding. This is the type of funding in the US that would be passed on in the form of grant overheads. And I think that in this context, almost every other country does it differently from the US, and we would view the use of grant overheads to pass on a block grant funding in this country as a use of grant income as a proxy for research performance. Interestingly, in 2011 in Australia, a trial of our research assessment exercise led the federal government to conclude that a rather controversial ranked list of journals that the government had seemed to be very committed to was not providing it with the overall benefits that had been anticipated. And this surprised many of us, because many of us, or several of us, had lost arms and legs in the process of putting this ranked list of journals together. I remember corresponding with the editors of some IS journals about the problems. When the ranking of statistics journals was first done, there wasn't a single probability journal in the top rank. This is because the ranking was done using 2-year impact factors. And it took us quite a while to persuade the government that this wasn't a very good way of assessing mathematicians, including probabilists. Anyway, I digress. We revised this journal ranking twice, and the government insisted on running with it, but just a few months ago they decided to abandon it. And the reasons why they did so are the following, and here I quote the Australian Minister for Innovation, Industry, Science and Research. He said that there is clear and consistent evidence that the rankings were being deployed inappropriately within some quarters of the university sector in ways that could produce harmful outcomes, and were based on a poor understanding of the actual role of the rankings. One common example, he said, was the setting of targets in connection with appointments or promotions for publication in highly ranked journals by institutional research managers. So what had happened in Australia was that in order to get promoted to full professor, you had to have at least so many papers in the top rank, at least so many papers in the top 2 ranks, and things like that. And this, I think, is always going to be a difficulty when the performance of individuals is measured using a formula. People are going to find all sorts of ways that are unrelated to actually achieving high levels of performance, so as to score highly by the formula. And I feel that perhaps fortunately this will ultimately be the undoing of that kind of analysis of performance, unless it is done sufficiently carefully. And nevertheless, despite the discarding of the ranked journals list, there is concern in Australia that the next round of this review process, which will take place next year, and which will result in money moving around, will involve citation analysis replacing journal rankings for the creation of the final assessment. I want finally, and in these list of examples of what other countries have done in connection with ranking academics, scoring them with in mind the distribution of research funding, to turn to the United Kingdom, which, as I said earlier, has, I think, a lot more experience in this than most any a country that has done this sort of thing. And this experience has led it to head off in directions which are potentially quite troublesome, and then to retreat to more reasonable approaches. And I think there's something we can learn from this. As I said, the first UK research assessment exercise took place it was about 86 or 87, I think. I remember being about that time. I remember being in the UK at that time, and there's some quite interesting tales that one can tell of the first research assessment exercise. But a key aspect of these exercises, which were held every 5 or 6 years, I think, through until the last one that was run in 2008, was that the people, or the committees that were tasked with reviewing specific areas, there was a committee which reviewed statistics in each case, statistical science. They were told not to use bibliometric analyses, not to rank journals, at least not to do it explicitly. Let me quote, for example, from what the RAE panels in the last research assessment exercise, RAE stands for Research Assessment Exercise, and it was the very last one of its kind to be run in the United Kingdom in 2008. Let me quote briefly from what the panels were instructed on that occasion. The instruction was as follows. In assessing excellence, the sub-panel will look for originality, innovation, significance, depth, rigor, influence on the discipline and the wider fields, and, where appropriate, relevance to users. In assessing publications, the sub-panel will use the criteria in normal use for acceptance by internationally recognized journals. And here comes the important part. The sub-panel will not use a rigid or formulaic method of assessing research quality. It will not use a formal ranked list of outlets, such as journals, nor impact factors, nor will it use citation indices in any formulaic way. And so it was from the late 80s through to 2008. However, there are various reasons in 2008 to think that the RAE concept had run its course. First of all, it was really quite expensive. There were calculations that you could run a university in the United Kingdom, of a university of modest size, on the basis of how much money was spent around the country organizing for and undertaking the research assessment exercise. Another problem with the research assessment exercise, which Ruth Williams and I encountered, particularly when visiting the United Kingdom in December for a review, was that it has tended to concentrate research excellence in rather too small a number of institutions. So there was a need to somehow moderate the process in a variety of ways, in particular to make it cheaper. Reflecting that latter goal, the replacement for the RAE was originally intended to use metrics in place of peer review. And here I quote from the Research Policy Committee of Universities. I think in 2007 that committee wrote that it is the government's intention that the current method for determining the quality of university research, i.e. the UK research assessment exercise, should be replaced after the next cycle is completed in 2008. Metrics, rather than peer review, will be the focus of the new system. And it is expected that bibliometrics, using counts of journal articles and their citations, will be a central quality index in this system. And this view had been created by the science research councils, in particular in the United Kingdom, by a number of statements they had made and written. And of course, it was quickly picked up across the land. For example, the London Times Higher Education Supplement for 9th of November 2007, just 4 years ago, headlined a story on its front page with the words, "New research assessment exercise based on citations." And the article on that page ran as follows. After next year's research assessment exercise, funding chiefs will measure the number of citations for each published paper in large science subjects as part of the new system to determine the allocation of more than £1 billion a year in research funding. A report published by Universities UK enforces such a citations per paper, those 3 words are in quotation marks, system as the only sensible option among a number of so-called bibliometric quality measurements. It concludes that measuring citations can accurately indicate research quality. And that's the end of the quotation from the Times Higher Education exercise. So at that point, things looked a little dire and forbidding, particularly to mathematical scientists and to large parts of statistical science, where the analysis of a bibliometric, or perhaps I should say, alternatively, where the citation behavior varies quite widely. So the way in which probabilists cite, the frequency with which they cite, the frequency with which they publish differs quite considerably from its counterpart for statisticians working in bioinformatics, for example, and subjects like that. And these considerations and many others led the United Kingdom to withdraw from the position which it was obviously contemplating in 2007. The Research Excellence Framework, as it's called, the REF, which will replace the RAE and be run for the first time in 2013, will instead assess research in at least 3 ways and incorporate peer review. So it won't, after all, be just bibliometric assessment. In a sense, the British have agreed with the Italians, and the Australians have yet to agree. They've agreed with the Italians that bibliometric analysis by itself is inadequate and inappropriate. And I won't go into any detail here except to mention the first of the criteria which the RAF will use. It will measure outputs, publications, and it will attract weight of 65%, and I quote, no, this is not, I think, an exact quotation. The primary focus of the research assessment framework exercise will be to identify excellent research, apparently using largely expert peer review, but in subjects where robust data are available, and here I quote, a peer review may be informed by additional citation information. So you can see that the ball has moved quite clearly from one hand to the other here. Rather than have a citation-oriented assessment of research, the assessment now will be one which is largely peer review, but in some instances informed by citation analysis. And there are still reasons to be concerned about some elements of that review, but nevertheless, of this proposed review starting in 2013, but nevertheless things look a bit better than they did back in 2007. Let me finish off by noting that the US is not as vulnerable to these difficulties as many other nations, such as the UK, European countries including France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, but not Germany, and also Australia, that have relatively unified national systems. The wide diversity of funding through different states in the US, through both public and private sources, gives you a lot more robustness and in the process removes virtually entirely the risk of all following one another down the plug hole. Admittedly, substantial research funding in the US is provided federally by one source, although some of us who saw the decisions that were made yesterday might wonder how much that federal funding will continue. It's a bit concerning, but let us see. In such a state or provincial system, such as there exists in the US, in Germany, and also in Canada, one state can experiment with different ways of measuring and rewarding research performance, and others can sit on the sidelines and watch the experiment and adopt the methodology only if it is effective. And that's the sort of option which those of us who live in the UK, in France, the Netherlands and Australia worry whether we shall have in the future. As statisticians, we should become more involved in these issues than we are. We are often the subjects of the analyses that I've discussed, and almost alone we have the skills to respond to them. For example, by developing new methodologies, or by pointing out the existing approaches that are challenged by the sorts of problems that I've mentioned. To illustrate this point, I perhaps should refer to the fact that the proponents of impact factors and other aspects of citation analysis, in my experience, have little or no concept of the problems that are caused by averaging very heavy-tailed data. Citation data are typically very heavy-tailed. We should definitely take a greater interest in this area. Thank you very much. Okay, I suppose I'll take some questions if anybody wants to raise something, but it is getting a bit late in the evening. I seem to have lost my crib sheet. Can you remember what's the very last bit on the sheet? Yes, okay. All I have to do is to remind you about the reception, which is right down the end of the corridor there, and also to remind the recipients of the New Fellows Awards and the of the fellowships and the Laha Travel Awards to stay behind so we can take group photographs. Thank you very much.